Welcome everyone to Political Paradigm. I am Terry Ikumi. Today we x-ray the National Assembly as we celebrate 25 years of uninterrupted democracy. We also analyze the 10th Assembly 1 year after. And as we make this assessment, the impact of the National Assembly on the living conditions of Nigerians takes center stage. Also, the priorities of the National Assembly and the executive by proxy will be touched. The issue of the presidential jet takes a prime position today because it was the House of Representatives who recommended that the faulty jets be replaced, and the Senate president saying that if the presidency puts in a request to acquire a jet, no amount of blackmail can stop the Senate from giving its approval, did not sound people-centric to a great number of Nigerians. And at this moment, there's been no formal request from the presidency, but the information is that the presidency is proceeding with the acquisition of 2 presidential jets. Now, this is generating heated debate in the public space, mainly because many do not think it is as important at this moment of dire need when Nigerians are being told by the president to tighten their belts and be more prepared to make sacrifices for the good of the country. Because of the economic downtime and rapidly rising cost of living, of course. Now, 9 years ago, the Nigerian government under President Muhammadu Buhari put 2 presidential jets on sale to cut down the number in the fleet, which was 10 at the time. Some were to be handed to the Nigerian Air Force to boost its operations. Now, the annual cost of running the presidential fleet, as seen in the budgets, run into millions of naira. Now, explain that to Nigerians at this time why it is important to purchase new aircraft when there are countries doing much better than us economically with no presidential aircraft. In fact, William Ruto of Kenya recently talked about how he opted to book Kenya Airways to cut cost instead of buying a new plane worth 70 million. Now, Nigeria has no national carrier. That ordinarily many believe should be the primary target when we talk aviation, so we can make money. It's shameful that smaller African countries like Kenya and Ethiopia have national airlines, and the giant of Africa does not. What's even sad is the former of Aviation, Hadi Sirika, accusing the then Committee on Aviation led by Honorable Noli Naji of requesting to own 1% of Nigeria Airways in order to get the approval of Parliament. That's a lot to talk about today, especially with regard to the priorities of the National Assembly and by proxy, the executive. So let's get talking now. Welcome to Political Paradigm once again as we put the National Assembly in focus. My guest is a former member of the House of Representatives, Honorable Mark Wheeler. Welcome to Political Paradigm.
Thank you very much, Terry.
It's nice to see you again.
Mine.
Nice to see you again. You know, you've been on the outside for a while. And perhaps I just start by asking you how it feels to be a former lawmaker and experiencing what we go through as, how do they put it, ordinary Nigerians.
Well, thank you very much again, Terry, for having me. Obviously, for a lot of our constituents, they still run to us because they seem to usually believe after being in office, you still have the wherewithal to address a lot of their issues, and which is typically what members serving at the moment still face in the circumstances we're facing as a country. But it's good to also be on the outside looking in and observing and willing to speak the truth about what is going on, which I think is what this current administration needs. If Mr. President wants those people to tell him the truth, some of us are here. And that is what I believe I will do today, to speak the truth to power. I
like that. So let's begin now. It's been 1 year already of the 10th Assembly. So I'd like you to assess this National Assembly based on your experience as a parliamentarian. If we put that aside, in fact, and look at yourself as a Nigerian and say, okay, how has this Assembly benefited me in the last 1 year, considering what's going on in the country now with regard to the economic crunch and the standard of living increasing rapidly?
Okay, so let me start by speaking as a Nigerian citizen. Now, one of the things I would want to see my representatives do is hold the executive accountable in their role of legislation, in their role of oversight, which is something that unfortunately the executive has not been allowing the National Assembly do enough, even in this dispensation. Let me highlight this with every sense of responsibility and holding like I wanted to say, those in authority, to account for what they owe the Nigerian people. This is the first time, I'm not aware of any president previously advising, the leadership of the National Assembly to reduce the number of times they call his ministers. I don't know if you heard about that. Mr. President actually admonished, in a meeting he had, I think, with the Senate President and the Speaker, the calling, While I understand his concern about, reining in, let me not say reining in, his concern about his ministers being able to do their work, it's important to also point out that the National Assembly, the legislature, needs to also do their work. If it is important that the National Assembly summon a minister every week because there are topical issues to decide, then they will have to summon them every week. It is not good in the principle of separation of powers for Mr. President to be admonishing the National Assembly with regards to how many times they call the president, no matter how well-intended his comment was. Secondly, another disturbing observation I will make as a Nigerian, and this time also as a legislator, we need to hold that institution in the sacrosancy that it deserves. And I do not think that is upheld when, with all due respect, His Excellency, the Senate President, starts to commission projects on behalf of Mr. President. Where is the oversight? We can accept that it's the same political party, but it's rubbing it in the face of Nigerians to say we are so in support of our party and our president that even I, as the head of another arm of government who has oversight over this other arm, will now be the one representing the president, the head of the other arm, to go and commission projects. I think that is not appropriate. That does not imbue confidence in the Nigerian people of the independence of the National Assembly and the ability to hold the executive to account.
But is that wrong? Is there anything wrong with that? You've already said it's the same political party, and you know that this assembly prides in having a relationship with the president, who is a former lawmaker as well. Yes. So some would say that's the synergy with which they work. So beyond your personal opinion that it doesn't tell well, what is wrong about it?
Okay, so now, like I fundamentally tried to highlight in the beginning, the responsibility of the National Assembly is oversight over the executive. And of course, in legislation and appropriation, in addition to representation. This is just a summary of it. Now, one of the key roles is being able to have the ability to hold the executive to account. Now, when you have the chairman of the National Assembly going to commission projects on behalf of the president, that displays a semblance of complicity in whatever transpires. We believe that when we talk about good relationship, which should still be to the benefit of the country, it should be in terms of being able to avoid fisticuffs and be able to agree on what is important to tackle for the people of the country, and to be able to have the ear of the president to be properly advised about what needs to happen. But when you are seen as a poster child, permit me to use that term, of the president and commissioning projects, I personally think, and I'm sure a lot of Nigerians and a lot of my colleagues in the National Assembly agree with me, that is not something that should be encouraged.
Is that how you see the Senate president, poster child of the president?
No, but I'm saying that, so that is what it appears to be when he can be called at every whim to go and commission projects. The Senate president, with all due respect, is a very busy person. He has a responsibility over the National Assembly and over the interests of the Nigerian people.
There's something else you said. You said that the executive doesn't allow the National Assembly carry out its oversight function. I know you had mentioned the president saying that the National Assembly should not summon the ministers just randomly like that. But how does that prevent the National Assembly from carrying out its oversight function? Or perhaps you may want to expatiate on what you mean by the executive not allowing the National Assembly carry out its oversight function.
Okay, so let me start by how it affects the National Assembly when the president himself mentions that. Remember, the presiding officers in both houses of the National Assembly are from the same party as Mr. President. Of course, there's allegiance to the party and to the president. So when he makes that kind of admonition, obviously he's putting them on the spot. So you now have a situation where they'll try to, how would I put it now?
Not offend the president.
Precisely. Assuage the concerns of Mr. President. So invariably,
but they can look into the books of the ministries, departments, and agencies.
That is the responsibility.
Without actually inviting the ministers.
Not effectively, not all the time. There are times when you will need to hear from them on the government policy or an explanation about what has transpired. So, and then of course, the minister will have to be reached to provide that information. Yes, so while the process of looking and appraising whatever documents they've received is going on, you don't have to invite the minister, but usually there is a need to invite the minister because the work of the National Assembly is in the public. And that is one of the reasons why Nigerians don't seem to understand the importance of the legislature. Our public hearings are public. Our plenary is public. A lot of times the FEC meetings, how many of us know what transpires? We're just told. But you have live proceedings of coverage of the plenary. So that's one thing it can affect when Mr. President makes that statement. And then secondly, with regards to the executive, now you see, the executive tends to not want to recognize the powers inherent in the Constitution with regards to the National Assembly. Because when it comes to matters of security, you see that happen in other climes where classified information is shared with the National Assembly because that responsibility of being elected to that position bestows upon you certain privileges. And that is what I do not see happen a lot, even in this 10th Assembly, to be able to maybe I might not speak for everybody, but to the few members who I'm still in touch with, who are heading very sensitive committees, they are still not privy to a lot of details of what is going on. And that is why the Nigerian people need to understand who you elect to be in that position. You need to be able to trust and have confidence that they can handle the responsibilities when they get there. So this is one of the aspects, and then of course, the aspect of not responding to the summons of the House, which is not made any better when the president makes that kind of statement, so that they feel emboldened to say, yeah, in line with Mr. President's wish. But at least I appreciate the fact that, some ministers have been honoring, the invitation of the National Assembly, which is good. But it's important that the executive realizes separation of powers and the constitutional powers that the National Assembly has in these matters.
Well, you wouldn't blame the entire lawmakers, I think, because, you were in the previous assemblies and you know the stance taken by the leadership of the National Assembly at the time. So let's say Femi Gbajabiamila, who openly, berated the ministers for not showing up. We haven't seen that kind of body language or reaction from either the Speaker or the Senate President.
His Excellency, our Speaker, Femi Gbajabiamila, of course, came from the school of opposition, and you can say that he cut his teeth in the opposition and confronting issues head on, and this current Speaker, is a gentleman. I've seen members commend, his selflessness in the way he handles issues concerning them. So his approach will be different, in terms of accosting issues. So that doesn't stop him still from taking charge and taking responsibility for what needs to be done, which I believe that he's doing. And I believe there are certain aspects of, the circumstances now that they, as the National Assembly, need to pick up the gauntlet about, and as we discuss, I'll go into details about that. The National Assembly has a responsibility. Maybe I can proceed to just say it in section 162. about revenue allocation. Now we're caught up in the middle of the issue of minimum wage, which is fundamentally part of what affects our standard of living as a people. And it's important the National Assembly realizes that we are operating a revenue sharing formula that has been in existence from the military era. You'll find that very hard to believe, but that is what is going on. The last time a recommendation was made, President Obasanjo attempted to do that. It didn't see the light of day. Mr. President is compelled by the Constitution in Section 162, after receiving advice, and that part, the RAMFAC, Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, has a responsibility to make a proposal to Mr. President about revenue allocation, which he takes to the National Assembly, who now decide based on the facts on what to do. A huge clamor about this issue of minimum wage has to do with the fact that the National Assembly has not yet taken up that responsibility. We need to reduce the power and the amount to the center. The states can't pay because they don't have the funds. We can release funds, more funds in the revenue allocation. It's not cast in stone. You know, people just don't seem to realize that that's a key thing we're ignoring. And some of us are available. Mr. President, if he's listening, we're available to give him the advice. The National Assembly, we can give them the advice. These are fundamental areas that they need to look at. Even if it's 5% or whatever percentage, you release it, and the states can be able to pay and have more resources, because the grassroots, federating units, that is where governance, takes place.
Well, since you already started talking about the cost of living in the country, let's just sit with that, and let me ask you what the National Assembly's posture or response to the cost of living in the country now has been.
Yes, so in their own way, with the cooperation, I believe, of the presidency, I believe, there have been some attempts at reaching out to the people with palliatives. Of course, there has been the complaint, even from the members of the National Assembly, about the transparency with the amount of palliatives available to the people, and then, of course, with this issue of the current ongoing presidential conditional grant scheme, the lack of transparency thereof, of the program, how they are not completely being carried along in terms of that initiative. We don't want you to go the way of the humanitarian ministry we have seen in the past. But unfortunately, that's what it looks like is happening. And that is where I also say the executive does not carry the National Assembly along. These are initiatives that should be done with representation by the National Assembly, because they are closer to the people from the federal level. They're the closest to the people. They understand the nooks and crannies. They understand, where the issues are. They understand who the real people are. How that list is generated, National Assembly members, most of them don't know.
But Honorable Gwila, permit me to come in here. There's nothing new about these grants or palliatives. There's nothing new. We've seen this.
Yes.
Administration after administration. So if this is what the National Assembly should be priding itself in, should they be commended for something like that? Because these, these are temporary measures.
Yes.
So in the long run, what exactly is the National Assembly doing differently, especially because the standard of living now is different from what it was years ago? We can all see that the prices of food has skyrocketed, electricity has skyrocketed. Basically, being in Nigeria at a time like this is really difficult.
Okay, so let me now explain. Now, why I started by pointing that out is, it's the responsibility of the National Assembly to approve those funds in the first place. So it's commendable that they're going ahead to even approve that should be done, that those palliatives should be released. But it's another thing also for the National Assembly to make initiatives that the executive will implement. Remember, the executive is responsible for implementation. A lot of times when the National Assembly tries to, interfere, let me use that word, because they're not interfering, they're just doing their work, in what the executive has brought for appropriation, the media starts to say padding, budget padding, budget padding. And that is where you need to understand the National Assembly needs to be allowed to make an input. And that's what the Fiscal Responsibility Act envisages. that there's supposed to be a time, maybe the media doesn't know, at which the Ministry of Finance calls all stakeholders together to discuss the budget before it comes. I can assure you as we speak, the National Assembly is waiting for a supplementary budget that they do not know the origin of those ideas about. It is just when it comes to them, then they start to tweak it in line. That is not how it's supposed to be. Before you even start to put the budget together, you're supposed to call the National Assembly and say, look, in your area, in this area, what are we supposed to do? That will be proper representation. And that is the challenge the National Assembly is having at the moment. Because again, they are waiting for supplementary budget. It is when that comes to them that they start to look at and start to see how to affect or, bring up ideas that will be better focused on the people. And then one of the things I would like to advise also to Mr. President and the National Assembly in considering these palliatives, the total amount, and I've done this math before when Mr. President at the time, President Buhari, made the same proposal. If you remember, they wanted to give, was it 20,000 for 3 months across the country. This time it's 50,000, so it's even more. And in our desire to move from consumption to production, because for me, 50,000 naira per month for 3 months again now is just consumption. Isn't it better? In every local government, I've done the math, this amount they want to give out is enough to set up a cottage industry in each local government. In 774 local governments across the country that will be productive, that will outlive this government. There's something that the former governor of Katsina State initiated when he was head of Smedan DG, one local government, one product, all up. Every local government has something they can offer. If we focus on doing that, it'll be more productive. And this is where the National Assembly too should create those opportunities for those kind of initiatives to say, hey, look, Mr. President, even though this is what you want to do, this is what we think this funds will be better expended on. So you can imagine in every local government, your local government, my local government, we have an industry. We're producing something. We're contributing something in the value chain. The overall impact on this country will be humongous. Why do we want to just dispense? We don't have a welfare scheme that is sustainable. So why do we want to throw away? That's what I consider it to be.
So what's the total of this amount that you've put together?
Well, it's, in my own estimation, at 50,000 times 4 million, I think that's the initial target they're looking at. So we're talking in excess of maybe, 400 billion or thereabouts. I'm not too sure. I've not done the math. I've not done the math.
Okay, so that brings me to the issue of the presidential jet, because it's generated reactions. Many people do not think that this is the right time to do something like that. So I want to first off start off by asking you what your thoughts are about the acquisition of presidential jets at this time, primarily because it's your former constituency, the House of Representatives, that drew attention to the fact that the president flew private when he was going from Netherlands to Saudi Arabia because of a faulty jet, and then the vice president had to cancel his trip to the US because of a faulty jet, and said, listen, let's sit down and find out what the problem is. So they did have an investigative hearing, which wasn't entirely open to the public or to us as journalists. And then they came up with the conclusion that the presidency should buy new jets. What do you make of that?
Okay, so first and foremost, I would say that, in my own opinion, the, analysis of the issues concerning the initial aircraft should have been done, in the public. So let me take your word for it that you say it was not entirely public, because I too was not privy to the details of whatever investigation was carried out. But it's important for these issues to be made known to the Nigerian public very clearly. There are professionals everywhere. Nigeria is not, and I take note of the statements made by, again, His Excellency, the Senate President, which, like pointed out, was not people-centric, but I like to say people-friendly, because it seems as if, again, they're willing to just approve whatever is brought. So now, in the first instance, what is wrong with these aircraft? how old are they? The fact that something happened when Mr. President flew to Paris and couldn't fly to Saudi Arabia might not be something to do with the planes being faulty. It might have been oversight on somebody's part. It might have been a lack of maintenance. These aircraft require frequent, constant, steady maintenance according to international standards. And this is something that we expect to be done in Nigeria, but we will be shocked that a lot of things we expect to be done are not done the way they're supposed to be done. You and I know that. So that is the first thing to address. Because like you, I also think we need to be sensitive to the circumstances in the country before we start to engage in that kind of expenditure because of the maintenance cost of these aircraft in the first place. I have seen the figures running into billions over the years, hundreds of billions on these aircraft.
Maintenance.
Maintenance, yes. So what would we expect to happen if we suddenly say we want to buy a new aircraft? Where did all that money go? Were they not maintained? How old are they? They might start to refer to issues that happened in Iran. In Iran, their country under sanctions. It was a helicopter. They were not allowed to carry out some routine maintenance or have access to the kind of aircraft that a modern fleet should have. In Malawi, it was a clear case of ignoring or rather not being sensitive to weather conditions. Again, it was not mainly the issue of the aircraft. So it's something that I believe the National Assembly should be very careful in handling so they don't come across again as being insensitive to the yearnings of the Nigerian people to expend that amount of money.
And as representatives of the people, isn't it interesting that there has been no request from the presidency for a new aircraft? But it's the National Assembly who should be sensitive to what's happening that's making the recommendation that a new aircraft be bought. And what's even more interesting is while we say that there is no request from the presidency, we hear that the process for the acquisition of these aircraft, we even hear that's already been acquired, that it's on.
Yes, so
what does this say of Parliament?
Yes, so I will not hold brief for them. I know that there has been, statement in the media about the House of Representatives, talking about replacing or purchasing new aircraft from the presidential fleet. I will not say they didn't say so.
No, they did. I'm not second guessing. I'm telling you.
But even if they did, I'm sure
the National Security Committee of the House, led by Honorable Ahmad Satomi, made that recommendation.
Okay, yes. So, as someone who has, experience in the aviation sector, he's a former colleague and a friend of mine. I'm sure that based on his own understanding, he would have known that it was unbecoming for the president not to have access to the plane to be able to fly to Saudi Arabia, again, if that is what he said. But I'm sure that was out of concern for our president not being able to readily, access our presidential plane to go where he needs to go and all of that. I don't know how come a replacement wasn't sent to him immediately to come over there to fly him where he wanted. That's another alternative, because there's not just only one plane like in the fleet, but I believe that it was not a case of being insensitive, it was a case of expressing concern, but we should not be putting the cart before the horse too, as the parliament. We should not be expressing our willingness to do something when it has not even been brought to the National Assembly, and should not encourage, unconstitutional action. The president cannot start to expend funds without it being appropriated. That is the law.
Because that was made clear when the Senate president says, if the presidency requests, we will approve. That means the process must be, you request,
Definitely.
we'll look at it, and then we approve. But here you have a reverse, which is a problem in the country, isn't it? The House of Representatives is saying, we think there's something wrong, go ahead and buy. Meanwhile, when the issue happened, the presidency found a way.
No, I can assure you, I don't believe, Terry, that
I'm telling you.
Satomi said, go ahead and buy. He said, we need to
recommend.
Consider, maybe he's saying...
Well, that's the same thing, isn't it?
We need to consider, I'm sure he would have been considering that based on the fact that if there's a need.
No, he
for
did
that.
say that.
And I'm sure
the
that is where the
recommendation is that. But I don't want to dwell on that. I'm telling
Yes.
you what he said. But most importantly, the concerns around whether or not we need a new set of jets at this point is what comes to the fore. I remember that when this matter came up on the floor of the House, that Honorable Kingsley Chinde, the minority leader, says it tells badly on us that we have a poor maintenance culture. And if we're being honest, these aircraft were bought during the Obasanjo era. We understand that they have a 30-year lifespan,
yes.
and they're just 19 years old.
Yeah, so that is part of what I was going to say now, that the main issue here now is, and this is where even the National Assembly has to show responsibility, what is the condition of the aircraft? And like I said, if you remember, our maintenance culture is the problem. Has that maintenance been maintained as it's supposed to be? That, I believe, is what must have happened when Mr. President was stranded, in quote, in Paris. It must have been a result of that maintenance. And this is what needs to be overhauled. Because I personally do not think this is the time to be procuring new aircraft. That is being insensitive to the current circumstances of the country. Those resources can be applied elsewhere. And I believe that, like you pointed out, the lifespan of these aircraft is still within the allowable limits to function excellently, and to ensure the safety of our president and all of the people who fly on that aircraft. They just need to make sure the required maintenance is observed for those planes. That will be my own humble opinion.
I think it's disturbing as well, and I think that it's good that you take this stance, because I was hoping to get Honorable Ahmad Satomi here, but he couldn't make it because I think he's grieving. The concerns around making public the findings, the investigative hearings, the outcome of the investigative hearings on this matter was very important, because this is a time when Labour has demands. There's a time when the country is going through so much and the standard of living is really, really dropping. And a faulty airplane, I think this is the first time that we're openly hearing about a faulty presidential airplane.
Yes,
in Nigeria.
My recollection.
Exactly, but this is not the first time globally. The Canadian Prime Minister, I went digging and I found that he's also experienced that. They didn't buy a new airplane for him. The UK, for example, as also cited by Honorable Chinda when he was making a submission, leases out British Airways to its Prime Minister and the cabinet members to cut cost.
Yes.
So what does this say?
And in America, the Air Force One is still under the U.S. Air Force. So yes.
So what does this say about Nigeria, a country where there are about 63%, the 63% of its population are poor, struggling to pay salaries, and buying aircraft worth over $100 million? What does this say? And how do you think the people should react to something like this?
Yes, so obviously it's not and should not be the priority for the government at the moment. And like I said, once again, I'm not holding brief for him, but I'm just wanting to believe that it was, well intended when, the chairman of the House committee made that statement. Obviously, we don't want to see our president being stranded in another country. It doesn't tell well about us and the country. But of course, like you pointed out, the issue should be what happened, what caused that incident. And that is what I would encourage the National Assembly to make public. Every decision concerning this issue should be made public. If there has been an investigation about what transpired with regards to the aircraft, it should be made public. We have professionals replete in this aviation sector with knowledge about the industry. We can even invite other experts to tell the National Assembly the true situation and the condition of our presidential fleet, which I believe should be in good flying condition once every maintenance is made. And if there are repairs to be done, those can be done. We do not need to start to go into procuring new aircraft at this time. It is not something that I would recommend. And I believe that, Mr. President himself would not be willing to be seen to be indulging in that type of expense when the issue of minimum wage is still being discussed. These are funds that can be applied elsewhere, and we can't be talking about 60,000 or 70,000 so-called living wage when we're willing to expend, millions of dollars, in buying new aircraft?
I don't know if you're aware, but I know one thing I know is that you were a member of parliament in the past, under President Muhammadu Buhari's administration. Yes. And under that administration, I think two aircraft in the presidential fleet were put up for sale. Suggested, was that it? And then some were also to be sent to the Air Force to boost their operations. Do you have any knowledge of anything about them?
So that part of that is what I meant by the executive being not too transparent a lot of times with the legislature. And that is something that we did not get any feedback about or details about. And that is what I'll encourage the current chairman of Aviation, both in the House and the Senate, to investigate, to understand what happened. Did Nigeria actually sell the aircraft in the presidential fleet as was suggested by the last administration or not? And were some given to the Nigerian Air Force or not? We need to understand that this is the Commonwealth of the Nigerian people. It's not personal enterprise. So Nigerians need to get and to know the details of what happened with regards to those aircraft. I'm not aware of what transpired because at least as I'm aware of in the last assembly, those details were not provided. So it is something that I believe Nigerians need to be, told what happened. The thing that needs to be done now is to properly carry out an investigation of the status of all the aircraft. So we need to, like the last administration did, consider if some of them need to again be disposed of so that revenue can accrue from that towards another acquisition. These aircraft are still within the lifespan of proper functional operation, so they should still be able to give yield some reasonable amount in the open market. And Nigeria can now streamline the number of aircraft in the fleet so that we are also cutting down on the maintenance cost. I personally don't know what 10 aircraft in the fleet is being used for, so that is something that I believe needs to be looked at. So we should, as a National Assembly, carry out the due diligence in looking at the condition of the aircraft and making the recommendations for what needs to be replaced or what needs to be disposed of to enable the replacement, which would be preferable, and then what needs to be repaired and fixed for them to be functioning optimally.
So when you look at this National Assembly, do you think that so far, especially considering this conversation of the presidential jet, do you think that this National Assembly has taken up legislation from motions to bills that are really, really directed at the people?
Well, let me say that it's just 1 year in. I'm not, of course, making excuses for them, but it's just 1 year into the National Assembly, and they have, at least in some areas, shown people-oriented interest. Even with the issue of the minimum wage, you can see they waded into the matter. When it arose, the Senate President and the Speaker, had, a meeting with the labor leaders to discuss. And with regards to other initiatives of the government, you need to always remember that a lot of what kind of policy direction the country takes rests with the executive. But of course, even in the National Assembly, there are initiatives, I know, for instance, in the House legislative agenda with regards to the standard of living of the people. So it's just bringing those ideas to fruition now is what, I believe Nigerians are yearning for. Putting those things into practice, bringing those bills, So the minimum wage bill, for instance, is something that I believe should be expedited. Interventions like welfare for the country is long overdue. Medical insurance. These are things that I believe are in the works that need to formally be brought to the fore, that the National Assembly will do, And more than anything else for me, it's about oversight. We don't want a situation where things transpire and then we go back to trying to only find out why it transpired. I think it needs to be a lot more proactive. And that's where the cooperation of the executive is required. Because the oversight in the Constitution of the National Assembly did not say only post. It did not say only after it happens and you start asking what happened. That is more the work of the Public Accounts Committee that, does its work more post-mortem to find out what this expended. But other committees, the National Assembly as itself, can engage with the executive as these policies are being thought out and before they get implemented, because the National Assembly has the power for legislation, so they can bring up legislation that will be people-oriented and that will impact properly, on the lives of the people. For instance, let me raise this issue of digital assets, crypto, like many people know it, cryptocurrency, crypto exchanges, the blockchain. Now, the AI, these are evolving technological trends globally. Nigeria cannot be a pariah. Nigeria cannot avoid these developments from taking root. What do we do as a nation is to be able to adapt quickly. And that is where I know the National Assembly is working on legislation in that regard so that there can be proper regulation, because Nigeria has been trying to throw away the baby with the bathwater. A lot of the foreign direct investment we're looking at, a lot of the inflow of forex is hinged even on crypto. This is happening in Dubai. This is happening in countries around the world. So the incarceration of the Binance executive, in my own opinion, was uncalled for. The level of engagement and interaction with Binance by the government would have yielded more result than incarcerating him. I know that there's certain information they were requesting from them, they were not providing, but I believe that there are more diplomatic ways of addressing this, because there's a benefit to the country of digital assets, of cryptocurrency that we're not taking cognizance of, because I don't know if you're aware, Nigerians are among the top 3 most investors in crypto in the world. It might interest you to know that. Then why are we as a country trying to fight something that is here to stay? Whether we like it or not, cryptocurrency, digital assets are here to stay. How do we make the most of it? That's where legislation comes in. That's where regulation comes in. This is what we should be doing to reap the benefit of all of that to the country and our people. And then, of course, there are other aspects that have to do with direct foreign investment that we need to look at as a country. The ease of doing business, we have not seemingly made too much progress in that regard, in terms of the circumstances in the country, power, infrastructure, and a lot of things. But I believe that this is something that is within the legislative agenda of the National Assembly that I believe should be looked at as we enter into the next year of the National Assembly.
Great. Let's do a little politicking now. You had joined the Labour Party just before the elections. Sadly, you didn't win the election. Are you still a member of the Labour Party?
Yes, I am still a member of the Labour Party as it is at the moment. But of course, that does not mean that I support everything that is going on in the party. And that doesn't mean that there are no realignments that are going on. I'm sure you remember that I am, one of the pioneer members of the APC. We came in with the Buhari administration. I'm proud to say that we contributed to, bringing in the APC government at the time. So when they say former APC members. I am one.
Former PDP as well.
Yes. But like they say, all politics is local. So we had our own issues locally in the state. When we were, rising up to confront the government at the time about the incessant killing of our people and the herdsmen attacks, which of course has still not abated. We didn't really have time to talk about security, because that's another fundamental issue, because, the primary role of government is the welfare and the security, of the people. So this is something we're still facing. So these are critical things that are important to me. So more than just a party, it's about an ideology, it's about a consciousness, and it's about an alignment that allows me to be able to actualize what I'm convicted will bring development and succor and intervention to the needs of my people. So yes, at the moment, because I have not declared, you can say, for another party, it's not as if I still don't have, relationships with my colleagues and former party members in the APC or the PDP, but it's more or less because, of course, we have still not developed that level of ideology as a country to stick to a party. I must admit that, there's still discussions and, consideration of alignment.
So you could likely leave the Labour Party?
Well, if the party does not want to align itself with the wishes of the people. For instance, I'm not in support with how the National Convention transpired. I'm sure you know that the presidential candidate himself expressed reservations, the governor of Abia State, and against all that, the National Assembly caucus in its entirety was against it, but still, they went ahead to carry it out. You can see how internally there are still, altercations going on every day within the party. So I did not support the way it happened. It was shrouded in secrecy. I do not believe the National Executive Committee was properly constituted in Asaba, because I know what the Constitution says about those who should be part of it, and they were not there, and yet they went ahead with the convention. So I will not support illegality. So if I find a situation where that is against my convictions, is against the rule of law, then of course I'll have no choice but to leave, and align myself where I believe I can better actualize my political ambitions. So this is unfortunately what we find ourselves in as a country. But I'm hoping that as our democracy evolves, we still have a fledgling democracy. As it evolves, we'll get more aligned to either being progressives, or liberals, or,
So let me just get something straight. So you align with former NLC President Abdul Wahid Omar that the president of the current chairman of your party should go?
Well, I wouldn't say should go, but should allow a proper democratic process to transpire. If he was,
but at the moment,
if he was re-elected,
he shouldn't be there at the moment.
No, at the moment they should go back and revisit the convention.
So his tenure, the argument of Abdul
his
Wahid
tenure
Omar,
should have expired. Yes.
That means he shouldn't be there at this moment. So you align with that.
Yes. So the tenure should have expired, and a proper election and a proper convention should have taken place by now, which is what I don't think happened. Yes, I must admit about that.
So what's been done? I like to think that you are, despite the fact that you only just joined the party just before the elections, you have a rich political history, and I think that you'd be privy to information. So I'm going to ask you what's been done within the party to address this issue as we speak.
Okay, so within the party, some leaders and major stakeholders of the party have been trying to intervene and have, like the proper NEC, the NEC, and the Board of Trustees convene a meeting to discuss this. But that has been also challenging because the current National Working Committee seems to think that they're being attacked, based on what I believe they didn't handle properly. So you see they're being overly sensitive about that. So that has not been able to happen. And I will admit that as a former two-term member of the House of Representatives, who was a senatorial candidate of the Labour Party, the party has not done a good job of even interfacing with us. You know, I have been the one who has had cause to reach out to them at times when primaries are being held, like, okay, who are the people conducting these primaries? Aren't you willing to have, you know, credible individuals who you can be sure will handle this, you know, in line with the rule of law? You know, so these are certain shortcomings that I've been noticing. I know that as a party, the Labour Party was still cutting its teeth in the political sphere. You know, the wind of the presidential candidate, the obedient movement, you know, took them to levels they didn't anticipate or envisage. But that is when you need to learn quickly and adapt to the circumstances and start to put things in place. Do I think current National Working Committee, as constituted, has the best hands to handle the affairs of the party? No, I do not think so. We need to bring in more people, you know, who are, you know, better, you know, experienced to start to handle the affairs. In the North, for instance, you know, we did very poorly because we did not reach out to the North. For someone like me who was born in the North, you know, who grew up in the North, I understand how much more impact we could have had if they had listened to the advice some of us had to give in terms of how to reach out, you know, because the party now had this sectional, you know, and regional connotation from the get-go, which is not very good for the outcome.
You know, the former presidential candidate of the party is more or less the leader of the party on this matter. Do you think his body language or actions have spoken well?
I would think that he should have been more forthcoming. He did his best at the time the issue of the convention came up. He even attended against the wishes of some of us, you know, the NEC in Asaba, where he gave them his opinion about not going ahead with the convention, you know. But he has not been too forthcoming in terms of explaining exactly what he would prefer and see to happen. It's commendable when he came out to ask the chairman to account for the expenditure. This is what all of us expect, which has still not been done. I don't know if you've heard about it. That has still not been done, which is expected. So I'm sure those are some of the things that have made him also maybe lackluster in terms of that, because of course, how do you move forward without an account?
But what does this mean for the party?
You know,
first off, you have threatened to leave the party if it doesn't get its act together. And there are those who now fear, just as you've just mentioned, that the workings within the party could tear the party apart. And there are those who also believe,
I agree with you,
who also believe that your presidential candidate, who many see as the backbone of the party, could leave.
Yes, it's possible. As a Nigerian, he has the prerogative to do that. In fact, there are already suspicions of his discussions with El Rufai and other political leaders about another alignment, which is not against their constitutional right as Nigerians, you know, within their right to do so.
Do you support that kind of alliance?
You know? Yes, I don't. I have nothing against it.
But then there are obedients, you know, who fear that that's not morally okay because of how they perceive Mr. Peter Obi.
No, let me put it this way. The obedient movement is based on the personality of the person, not the Labour Party.
Absolutely.
So his aligning with the Labour Party is what enhanced the profile of the party. So they should realize that if that same person gives reasons why, just like me, in my constituency, in my state, a lot of people know me for my ideology, my conviction. So if I was to take a decision, it's not because I'm trying to betray the Labour Party. It will be because of the convictions I have about what is happening in the party. And it's important to point out that even with the prominence he gave the party and the visibility nationally and globally he gave the party, a lot of times he is still not being, and privy to this, accorded the amount of regard and recognition within the leadership of the party as he should. Instead, it appears as if there's an attempt to take advantage of that influence and that clout that he has given the party to seek certain personal interests.
Honorable Mark Bila, I'd like to thank you for your time on Political Paradigm.
Thank you very much. Pleasure was all mine.
Honorable Mark Bila is a former member of the House of Representatives. He's a member of the Labour Party. I'd like to thank you as well for your time on Political Paradigm. Remember to catch this episode and others on YouTube. Simply search Political Paradigm. I'm Terry Ikumi. Goodbye.